Welcome to the Global War Watch Network. Today we need to confront a dire, really urgent reality. The global food system, the very foundation of human survival, it's under an unprecedented assault. We are witnessing nothing less than a planetary struggle for sustenance, and is directly fueled by the escalating crisis of climate change. This isn't some distant theoretical threat. It is unfolding right now, impacting every single corner of our globe.
Indeed, it's a stark reality we're facing. Climate disruptions are pushing millions into the shadow of hunger, profound insecurity. In this exploration today, we're going to relentlessly examine the critical findings from, well, the latest report by the IPCC, that's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the leading scientific body alongside recent journalistic investigations. Our aim really is to reveal this intricate web of challenges and, crucially, to illuminate the urgent pathways to action. We'll explore the immediate, often devastating impacts of a warming planet on our food supply and the profound vulnerabilities within our current systems. But, our mission extends beyond merely identifying threats. It's about dissecting the solutions that demand our immediate and collective engagement.
Right. Our mission is to unpack these critical sources for you, to distill the most vital information, and frankly, to confront the hard truths about what's happening to our food. We aim to equip you with the knowledge to truly understand the scale of this crisis and to recognize the pressing need for systemic change. This isn't just an intellectual exercise. It's a call to understand and really to respond to a global emergency that impacts us all. So, okay, when we dig into the latest data, it's chillingly clear that observed climate change isn't just some future threat to our food systems. It's here now. It's actively reshaping how and where we can grow food. The increasing temperatures, the wildly unpredictable precipitation patterns, the accelerating frequency of extreme weather events, these aren't just statistics anymore. They are a lived reality for countless communities, manifesting as, disrupted crop yields and threatened livestock production with devastating regularity. What are the most immediate, sort of undeniable impacts you're seeing in the data, especially when we talk about staple crops?
Well, what's truly striking when we look at the observed impacts is how climate change is already affecting food security. It's not a maybe anymore. Take the data from the IPCC, it's unequivocal. For instance, just look at 2024, Brazil's Rio Grande do Sul experienced catastrophic heavy rainfall and floods. And these weren't just isolated incidents, they utterly devastated vast fields of soybeans, a critical global commodity. Beyond the agricultural losses, the human toll was immense. Over 150 lives lost, 500,000 people displaced from their homes, many of whom were directly dependent on agriculture. It's a stark reminder, really, of how interconnected our environment and our food systems are and, how quickly one can undermine the other. This isn't theoretical. It's happening right now, demanding our urgent attention.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not just a single devastating event, is it? We're seeing this pattern of intensifying extremes. I remember reading about the 2012 typhoon that ravaged the Philippines, destroying vast amounts of bananas. It took that industry something like 5 years just to recover from the losses of that single year. That's a staggering amount of time and resources for just one agricultural sector to rebound. So how are these specific climate shifts actually affecting different crops and regions? Are we seeing like uniform declines, or are there more nuanced impacts depending on the latitude or the type of crop?
That's a crucial distinction. And what's fascinating, in a worrying way, is the nuanced impact across different regions and crops. Studies that, carefully disentangle the influence of climate change from other factors, they show a significant negative effect on yields for key staple crops like maize and wheat in many lower latitude regions. These are often areas crucial for feeding large, rapidly growing populations, so any decline here has these amplified consequences. Think of regions like the Mediterranean, for instance. Warming compounded by drying has led to significant yield declines, often 5% or more, for crops that have sustained populations there for millennia.
Wow, 5% or more.
Yeah. Conversely, and perhaps surprisingly, some higher latitude areas have actually seen positive impacts for certain crops like maize, wheat, and sugar beets, mainly due to longer growing seasons. However, this is far from a balanced picture that suggests any kind of overall benefit. It's misleading to focus just on that. When you average it out globally, the sheer scale of the negative impact is stark. A global mean yield decrease of 4.1% for maize, 1.8% for wheat, and 4.5% for soybeans occurred just between 1981 and 2010.
That's huge.
It is. To put that in perspective, that's like losing years' worth of harvests for these foundational crops, silently eroding our basic food supply year after year. And this is even with the so-called CO2 fertilization effect factored in. where, higher atmospheric carbon dioxide can theoretically boost plant growth a bit. But the nuance here is critical. While plants might grow larger under elevated CO2, this often comes at the cost of nutritional quality. It can actually reduce vital micronutrients.
Right, so bigger doesn't necessarily mean better
Yeah,
nutritionally.
exactly. Plus, this fertilization effect doesn't magically solve problems like extreme heat or water scarcity, making it a very limited and, frankly, often misleading benefit. The overall trend, despite any localized gains, is a worrying decline in staple crop productivity globally.
Okay, so while some areas might see a temporary upside, the overall trend for our foundational food sources is really concerning. But the impact isn't just on staple crops, is it? Let's talk about what's happening to the very foundation of a healthy diet, our fruits and vegetables. These are often more delicate, more sensitive to temperature swings. What does the data tell us about their vulnerability?
You're absolutely right to focus on those. Fruits and vegetables, which are critical for nutrition and diverse diets, are incredibly vulnerable. Higher temperatures are projected to cause sharp declines in yields and crop suitability, especially in tropical and semi-tropical regions where so many of these crops thrive. Heat stress doesn't just reduce the overall amount of fruit. It can speed up the development of annual vegetables, leading to smaller, often lower quality yields. And this directly translates to more food waste because imperfect produce is often discarded long before it even reaches the consumer.
That's a critical point. Not just less food, but less good food and more waste built into the system. And it's not just about heat, right? You mentioned sensitivity. Some fruits and vegetables, like I think cauliflower and asparagus, they actually need cold periods, a certain number of chill hours for viable harvests. Are warmer winters disrupting this delicate balance too?
Precisely. That's another major issue. Warmer winters are simply not meeting these cold period requirements anymore in many traditional growing areas. We're seeing real-world shifts right now because of this. Projections, they show that common bean growing areas in Africa could lose 60% of their viability between 2078 and 2098. That's within this century. And bananas in Africa could see a 40% viability loss in the same period. These are staple foods for millions.
Wow, those numbers are stark.
They are. And consider Nepal. Apples, traditionally grown in certain altitudes, now need to be cultivated at much higher elevations because their previous growing zones have become too warm. And their mandarin oranges, once a staple of the mid-hills, are suffering from decline and disease, which is being exacerbated by numerous new insect infestations linked to the changing climate. These aren't abstract predictions. They are tangible impacts reshaping local agricultural economies and diets as we speak.
Okay, so it's not just the fields feeling the heat. Our livestock, the animals that provide so much of our protein, they're under enormous and growing pressure too. How are rising temperatures and changing weather patterns impacting animal agriculture? And what are the sort of ripple effects for communities that depend heavily on these systems?
Yeah, our livestock systems are indeed facing immense pressure. Rising temperatures, variable precipitation, even changing CO2 concentrations directly impact water availability, which is absolutely critical for animal survival and growth. Heat stress alone can severely affect animal production, their reproduction cycles, and their overall health. Animals, much like humans, have a limited tolerance for extreme heat, and when that threshold is crossed regularly, their productivity drops significantly, they reproduce less effectively, and they become much more susceptible to disease.
And are we seeing shifts in the disease patterns themselves? Are new threats emerging, or are old ones just moving into new territories because of the climate shifts?
Absolutely. Animal diseases are becoming more prevalent, and critically, they're shifting their ranges with these temperature and precipitation changes. This is particularly devastating for pastoral systems. Think of places like the Sahel or parts of Mongolia, which rely on extensive grazing lands and seasonal movements of herds. These systems are extremely vulnerable. They're experiencing decreasing rangelands due to drought, poor animal health from heat stress and disease, and alarmingly, increasing conflicts over access to vital land and dwindling water resources.
Conflicts over resources, yeah.
Right. While some northern regions, perhaps parts of the USA and Canada, might see slight productivity increases in rangelands due to potentially extended growing seasons, areas like Sub-Saharan West Africa are projected for massive declines, possibly up to 46%. And this isn't just a future scenario for some places. Mongolia's grassland productivity, for instance, has already dropped 20–30% since the late 20th century. This has direct measurable effects on the way they use and their overall herd sizes, eroding the very basis of livelihoods for millions of people.
That's just a profound disruption to entire ways of life built over generations. And what else is shifting alongside our temperatures and rainfall? It's not just the crops and animals themselves, but the biological threats to them, isn't it?
Yeah.
Pests and diseases.
You've hit on a critical point there. Climate change is profoundly altering the dynamics of pests and diseases for both crops and livestock, creating this continuously shifting biological landscape. And this isn't just about, a few new bugs appearing. It includes fundamental changes in how susceptible host plants and animals are. Their own defenses might be weakened. It includes shifts in pest biology, like more generational cycles within a single season due to warmer temperatures. This means they can reproduce more rapidly and cause significantly more damage in a shorter time. And it also causes dramatic movements in their climate envelopes.
Okay, can you explain climate envelopes a bit more clearly for us? What does that actually mean on the ground?
Of course. Imagine a particular pest, or even a specific crop, having its own ideal comfort zone of temperature and rainfall that's its climate envelope. It's the specific set of environmental conditions under which it can really thrive and reproduce effectively. As the planet warms, these comfort zones aren't just shifting gradually north or south, they're kind of dissolving in some areas and reforming elsewhere. This forces species to either migrate, adapt rapidly, or struggle to survive, often failing. We're looking at estimates that suggest around 50% of insects, many of which are pests or disease vectors, could change their ranges by approximately 50% by 2100 under current emissions trajectories.
50% range shift for half of all insects. That's staggering.
It is staggering, and it directly translates to significant crop losses and increased pressure on farmers to constantly manage these evolving and often newly emerging threats. It requires really robust, flexible strategies just to adapt to this shifting biological landscape. It's essentially an arms race against nature, fueled by climate change, and it's escalating.
An arms race. That's a potent image. And the difficult truth, as you've hinted, is that this burden, this need for adaptation, it isn't shared equally across the globe, is it? Who is bearing the brunt of these impacts, and why are they so disproportionately affected by this crisis?
Yeah, what stands out starkly in all the data is that the burden of this crisis is undeniably, grossly, not equally distributed. Developing countries, dry lands, high mountain regions, particularly across Africa, Asia, and South America, are already experiencing severe food insecurity. And these are often the regions least responsible for the historical emissions driving the problem in the first place. Think of smallholder farmers. They often rely on a complex, sometimes subsistence-based mix of crops and livestock for their livelihoods. They are disproportionately vulnerable, primarily due to limited adaptive capacity. They simply don't have the financial resources, the technological access, or the institutional support systems to cope with increasingly frequent and intense extreme weather events.
So it's acting like a stress multiplier for communities that are already living on the edge.
Precisely. That's exactly the term the IPCC uses, a stress multiplier. It takes existing cracks in our global system like poverty, political instability, lack of resources, and slams them with extreme weather, turning a difficult situation into a full-blown crisis. This often exacerbates internal and external migration, displacing communities and intensifying existing tensions over scarce resources. And it also has profound gender and equity dimensions. Women, who often play a key, yet frequently unrecognized role in household and community food security, often face greater vulnerability. This is due to existing inequalities in access to resources like land, credit, education, and decision-making power. Therefore, empowering women and implementing rights-based approaches to decision-making are not just moral imperatives. They can create critical synergies for adaptation and mitigation. They build resilience from the ground up by ensuring those most impacted have agency in finding and implementing solutions.
Okay, it's clear that the climate crisis isn't just about what we grow. It's digging into the very resources needed to grow it. Climate change is intensifying pressure on our foundational resources, water supplies, and land availability for agriculture. We already know the competition for land is fierce, driven by population growth, changing diets. How is climate change escalating this pressure even further?
The competition for land is indeed already fierce, and yes, it's said to increase dramatically. What's particularly concerning in this context is how potential land-based technologies for carbon dioxide removal, CDR, could impact this. Things like bioenergy with carbon capture and storage, or large-scale afforestation and reforestation projects. While potentially beneficial for climate mitigation, they could demand vast areas of land, areas that are currently, or could potentially be, used for food production. To achieve, say, a 1.5-degree C warming limit, some scenarios estimate a need for anywhere between 109 to nearly 990 million hectares just for energy crops. Common estimates hover around 380, 700 million hectares.
Wait, 700 million hectares. How big is that really?
To give you a sense of scale, that's an area roughly equivalent to the size of India, or maybe even larger, potentially needed just for bioenergy crops alone in some scenarios. This creates a direct and immense conflict. It puts significant pressure on food production and food security through competition for land, a fundamental resource for survival. It highlights a critical tension: the land we might need for climate solutions versus the land we absolutely need for food. Finding the balance is crucial.
That puts into stark perspective how interconnected these challenges really are. Land for fuel versus land for food. So when agricultural supply decreases due to these climate impacts and these resource pressures, what happens to food prices? And what does that mean for global hunger numbers?
Well, what's truly alarming is how these climate-related productivity declines translate directly into economics and ultimately human suffering. Decreased agricultural supply, which is a direct consequence of climate impacts like droughts, floods, heat stress, inevitably drives up food prices. Simple supply and demand. This then pushes millions more people into food insecurity, especially in vulnerable communities who often lack the resources to adapt or diversify their income or find alternative food sources. Just consider that over 821 million people are already undernourished globally. That number, tragically, has been rising since 2014, and it's exacerbated by ongoing conflicts and, of course, climate events like droughts and floods.
821 million and rising.
Yes, and what's even more critical in our analysis, and perhaps a bit counterintuitive, is that the level of mitigation effort needed to reduce emissions, the policies we put in place, can actually have a more significant impact on food prices than the direct climate impacts themselves, at least in the near term.
Really? How does that work?
Well, policies aimed at reducing greenhouse gas emissions, things like carbon taxes, or subsidies for switching land use, or incentives for land-based mitigation like planting forests or bioenergy crops, these can increase crop and livestock prices. They do this either by increasing production costs for farmers or by reducing the total land available for food production, as we just discussed. This potentially leads to significant increases in malnutrition, particularly among the poorest who spend a large portion of their income on food. This just underscores an urgent need for robust social safety nets to be implemented alongside climate policies. We need to protect the most vulnerable populations from these price shocks and ensure access to food, because without them, the very solutions we implement could inadvertently deepen the food crisis for those least able to cope.
That's a fascinating and incredibly sobering point. The potential unintended consequences of mitigation efforts if they're not carefully planned and implemented with equity in mind. And it's not just about the quantity of food available, is it? You touched on this earlier. It's also about its quality. There's this hidden dimension to the food crisis.
You're absolutely right. Beyond the visible undernourishment, the lack of calories, an estimated 2 billion people globally suffer from hidden hunger. This means insidious deficiencies in crucial micronutrients like iron, zinc, iodine, vitamin A, things essential for health and development. These deficiencies can lead to severe health problems, impaired cognitive development in children, reduced immunity across populations, making people less resilient overall. And what's truly shocking is that studies now clearly reveal rising CO2 concentrations directly lower the content of zinc and other vital nutrients in staple crops like wheat and rice.
The CO2 itself reduces the nutrients.
Yes, the plants grow, but they are less nutritious. It's not just a slight drop either. It has profound implications for public health. It's projected to put an additional 138 million people at new risk of zinc deficiency by 2050, primarily in Africa and South Asia, with nearly 48 million in India alone potentially affected. This direct impact on nutritional quality further compromises public health, even in scenarios where enough calories might technically be available.
So we have this silent crisis of micronutrient deficiencies at one end of the spectrum, but paradoxically at the other end, we're seeing this increasing prevalence of overweight and obesity. You mentioned around 2 billion adults globally. How do these two seemingly opposite problems connect? What does this dual burden mean for our overall resilience?
That's the complex and damaging dual burden of malnutrition. It's intrinsically linked to the increased availability and affordability of inexpensive, calorie-dense, but nutritionally poor foods. Think highly processed foods, sugary drinks. These foods fill stomachs, provide energy, but they don't provide the essential vitamins and minerals needed for good health. So this creates a complex crisis where entire populations, sometimes even individuals within the same household, can be simultaneously undernourished in essential nutrients and overnourished in calories. This paradox makes populations less resilient to disease, less economically productive, and ultimately less able to withstand the impacts of climate shocks or other crises. It traps communities in a cycle of poor health and heightened food insecurity. It's a systemic problem, deeply rooted in our modern food environment, not just an issue of individual dietary choice.
A systemic problem. And when we connect this to the bigger picture of the system itself, a shocking amount of the food that is produced is simply lost or wasted throughout the entire chain, isn't it? What's the scale of this problem, and how does it contribute back to climate change and resource pressure?
It's truly astonishing, almost criminal when you think about it. Globally, a staggering 8–10% of total greenhouse gas emissions caused by human activity are directly attributed to food loss and waste. Think about that. Almost a tenth of our entire climate impact comes from food that is grown, processed, transported, but never actually gets eaten. The nature of this waste differs significantly by region. In developed countries, a large share of produced food is wasted, often at the consumer or retail end. Think about food left on plates in restaurants, or produce spoiling in refrigerators at home, or supermarkets rejecting ugly food. Meanwhile, in developing countries, it's largely lost earlier in the supply chain due to, well, poor infrastructure, inadequate storage facilities, inefficient transport, lack of refrigeration. For instance, data from 2007 showed about 20% of food in Europe and North America was wasted, but a devastating 30% was lost in Sub-Saharan Africa before it even had a chance to be wasted by consumers.
30% lost, just gone.
Exactly. The potential for positive impact here is immense. Calculations show that simply having food loss and waste by 2050 could reduce the global need for cropland by about 14% and cut agricultural GHG emissions by 22–28%. The existing food system, from production right through to consumption, is riddled with these systemic inefficiencies that contribute directly to resource pressure and environmental impact. It represents a massive, largely untapped opportunity for both climate action and enhancing food security. It's arguably one of the lowest-hanging fruits for achieving significant positive change.
That's a powerful opportunity, definitely. But it also means we need to address the entire journey food takes, from the farm right to our tables. Climate change impacts extend far beyond the farm gate, as you said, directly hitting the intricate web of our food supply chains. What does this look like in practice? What kind of disruptions are we seeing?
It looks like severe disruptions, becoming more frequent and widespread. Our food storage and transport networks are becoming increasingly vulnerable, especially from extreme weather events. We saw this starkly during the 2011–2012 floods in Bangkok. Those floods severely disrupted the national food supply chains for Thailand because so much was centrally organized in the capital city, making the whole system highly susceptible to a single major event in one location. And it's not just physical damage to roads or warehouses, although that's significant. Food safety risks can also be exacerbated by changing humidity and temperature during transport and storage. These changes can foster microbial decay, faster spoilage, and pest infestations. Imagine a shipment of fresh produce traveling through an unexpected heat wave with inadequate refrigeration. The losses can be immense, both economically and in terms of wasted food. These cross-sectoral vulnerabilities, impacting everything from marine fisheries, things storage on boats, transport to processing plants, they just underscore the critical need for a holistic, system-wide approach to food security. It's not enough to just grow the food. We must ensure it can safely and reliably reach everyone who needs it, despite the increasing climate chaos.
Okay, the scale of the challenge is undeniable. It's immense. But there are also concrete pathways to building resilience. Let's talk about the urgent need for action, starting with how we can make agriculture itself more resilient to the climate changes that are already locked in. What practices should we be optimizing and scaling up right now?
Yes, absolutely. There are many practices that can be optimized and scaled up to advance adaptation throughout the food system. These represent significant pathways to resilience, and many are already known. They just need support and wider adoption. On the supply side, this includes things like increasing soil organic matter. Healthier soil holds more water, it's more fertile, making it more resilient to both droughts and heavy rainfall. We also need to improve cropland and grazing land management, using practices that prevent soil erosion and maintain fertility over the long term. Genetic improvements for heat and drought tolerance in crops are absolutely crucial. We see promising developments like pearl millet, which is naturally more resilient to arid conditions and is being further bred for even greater hardiness. Similarly, genetic improvements in livestock are vital for heat tolerance and disease resistance. And new tools like CRISPR-Cas9 are being developed and deployed to improve yields and stress tolerance in plants more rapidly.
Right, CRISPR-Cas9. Can you elaborate a bit on what that is and what it actually means for agriculture on the ground? How does it help?
Absolutely. CRISPR-Cas9, it's often called genetic scissors in the popular press. It essentially allows scientists to make very precise edits to a plant's DNA, almost like using a word processor to find and replace specific genetic code. This allows them to build in specific desirable traits like resistance to a particular disease, or tolerance to drought, or heat, or even salinity from rising sea levels. It's considered a potential game changer because it allows for very targeted modifications, significantly accelerating the breeding process compared to traditional methods, which can take decades. When you pair this with something called phenomics, which is essentially high-speed, high-tech plant observation using sensors, cameras, AI to track how thousands of plants grow and respond to different conditions, we can really fast-track the development of these super resilient crops. These are not just incremental changes, they are essential investments in the fundamental capacity of our planet to continue feeding us even in a rapidly changing climate.
That's truly fascinating, the blending of this cutting-edge technology with fundamental agricultural needs. But beyond genetic modification, what about the farming techniques themselves? Are there sustainable methods that offer multiple benefits, perhaps for both resilience and the environment?
Yes, this is where it gets really interesting because we're seeing increasing evidence and adoption of sustainable farming techniques that offer exactly that multiple benefits, a win-win. Take agroforestry, for example. This integrates trees and shrubs directly into farming landscapes alongside crops or livestock. It can sequester significant amounts of carbon in the soils and in the biomass of the trees. It reduces soil erosion, improves water infiltration, and enhances overall soil health, making the land much more resilient to extreme weather. Plus, the trees can provide shade for crops and livestock, which is increasingly important in hotter climates. They act as windbreaks, and they can offer additional income streams for farmers through fruit, nuts, or timber.
So it diversifies income, too.
Exactly. And then there's conservation agriculture. This involves practices like no-tillage or minimum tillage, meaning farmers disturb the soil as little as possible, and using cover cropping. Cover cropping means growing specific plants not for harvest, but specifically to protect and enrich the soil between the main cash crop cycles. These practices significantly improve soil health, water retention, and overall resilience. Furthermore, diversification of farming systems in general, integrating different crops, perhaps rotating them, integrating livestock, maybe even aquaculture like fish ponds on the farm, provides multiple income streams for farmers and much greater resilience against climate shocks or market fluctuations. If one crop fails due to drought, another might survive, or the livestock could provide a crucial buffer. This isn't just about environmental benefits, it's fundamentally about building economic stability and reducing vulnerability at the farm level.
And water, of course, is absolutely fundamental to all of this. With increasing water scarcity becoming a reality in so many regions, what innovative water management techniques are critical for securing our future food supply?
Addressing water scarcity is, yes, absolutely paramount in this whole crisis. It's often the limiting factor. This involves a whole range of techniques. For water harvesting and storage, we're talking about things like building farm ponds, check dams, even larger reservoirs where appropriate, to capture and retain precious rainfall during wet seasons for use in the dry periods. It also demands much more judicious utilization through improved irrigation systems. We need to move away from wasteful flood irrigation towards highly precise techniques like drip irrigation, which delivers water directly to the plant roots, minimizing evaporation and runoff losses. There are also innovative approaches like alternate wetting and drying, or AWD, for rice cultivation. This dramatically reduces the water needed for rice, a crop traditionally known for its very high water consumption. It works by allowing the paddy fields to dry out periodically rather than remaining continuously submerged without significantly impacting yield.
That sounds counterintuitive for rice, but very effective.
It is, and it saves a lot of water and reduces methane emissions, too. Beyond the traditional fields, we also see potential in urban farming. This includes advanced hydroponic systems where plants are grown in nutrient-rich water solutions without soil, or aquaponics, which combines fish farming with hydroponics. These systems offer very low water usage solutions, and they're particularly vital in rapidly urbanizing areas where local food security and water efficiency are becoming increasingly critical concerns. These innovations aren't just about conserving water, they're about fundamentally reimagining how we cultivate food in a future that will be, for many, much more water stressed.
Okay, these supply-side solutions sound promising, improving resilience on the farm. But let's remember that massive inefficiency we discussed earlier. Food loss and waste. How can we possibly tackle that enormous problem on a global scale? It seems overwhelming.
We absolutely must tackle waste head-on. It's unconscionable, given the hunger levels. Reducing food loss and waste demands both technical solutions and profound behavioral shifts across society. On the technical side, we need things like improved harvesting techniques to minimize damage and spoilage right at the source. We need better, more accessible on-farm storage solutions, particularly in developing countries, to protect harvests from pests and rot. We need innovative packaging that actively prolongs shelf life. And critically, we need a significant expansion and improvement of cold chain infrastructure, refrigerated transport, and storage, especially in developing regions where losses due to lack of refrigeration are often highest.
So infrastructure and technology are key.
They are key parts, yes. But it's not just technology. Non-technical solutions centered on behavioral changes and public awareness campaigns are equally vital, perhaps even more so in developed countries. Think about changing consumer attitudes towards less than perfect fruits and vegetables, the slightly bruised apple or the oddly shaped carrot that is perfectly nutritious but often gets discarded simply for aesthetics. Or simply being more mindful of what we buy and consume in our own homes, planning meals better, storing food properly, actually using leftovers to reduce waste at the household level. Beyond just prevention, recovering food waste for other uses, like animal feed or generating biogas for energy, is important. And researchers are even exploring groundbreaking concepts like creating microbial protein from sewage or food waste to replace traditional feed crops like soy, which have their own environmental footprint. Now, some of these more radical innovations face significant economic and social challenges related to public acceptance, scalability, and cost effectiveness. But they represent a frontier in maximizing resource efficiency and minimizing the environmental impact of our food system.
Right. It sounds like we need a really comprehensive approach that targets every single stage of the food supply chain, from farm to fork and beyond. And when we connect this to the bigger picture, it's not just about how we produce food or how much we waste, but also fundamentally what we choose to eat. What role do our diets play in creating a more resilient and sustainable food system?
Demand-side changes, changes in consumption patterns, are incredibly powerful levers, and they are often overlooked in policy discussions. Shifting towards diets with a significantly lower share of animal-sourced products, particularly red meat from ruminant animals like cattle and sheep, and substantially increasing the proportion of plant-based foods like pulses, beans, lentils, nuts, seeds, fruits, and vegetables can profoundly reduce the pressure on land and water resources. Just as an example, producing 1 kilogram of beef requires vastly more land and water and generates far more greenhouse gases than producing 1 kilogram of lentils or beans. So, this dietary shift can also substantially lower greenhouse gas emissions associated with food production. Livestock agriculture, especially ruminants producing methane, is a major contributor globally. What's more, these low GHG emission diets, which are generally more plant-rich, are often healthier too. They offer potential co-benefits for public health, such as reducing the prevalence of heart disease, type 2 diabetes, and some cancers, which are linked to high consumption of red and processed meats and low intake of fruits and vegetables. Now, of course, there are complexities and uncertainties around consumer acceptance, deep-seated cultural preferences, affordability, and ensuring nutritional adequacy, especially in contexts where animal products are vital sources of micronutrients. But the potential for positive impact, both environmental and health-related, from shifting dietary patterns is undeniable. It requires a fundamental reevaluation of what constitutes a healthy and sustainable diet in the 21st century.
That's a really significant point about our individual and collective dietary choices. But this raises an important question that often comes up in these discussions. Is local always better for the environment? There's a strong push for local food movements, buying from nearby farms. But is that always the most climate-friendly option, or is it more complicated?
That's a great question, and the answer is definitely nuanced. It's not as simple as local equals good.
Yeah.
While consuming locally grown foods can reduce greenhouse gas emissions by cutting down on food miles, the emissions from transport, this is only really true if those local foods are grown efficiently and, crucially, in season. The overall emissions reduction potential actually varies significantly by region, by season, and by the specific food product. What's often surprising to people is that in some cases, imported food might actually have a lower overall carbon footprint. This can happen if it's produced in distant regions with significantly lower emissions intensity, maybe due to their specific farming practices being less energy intensive, or having climate advantages that mean less need for heated greenhouses, or using more renewable energy in production and processing. For example, tomatoes grown year-round in a fossil fuel-heated greenhouse in a cold climate might have a much higher carbon footprint than tomatoes grown naturally outdoors in a sunny region and then efficiently transported, even over a long distance. The total carbon footprint of our food depends on a complex interplay of both on-farm emissions, how it's grown, including things like fertilizer use, land management, methane from livestock, and the transport emissions, how it gets to us. So simply buying local isn't always the silver bullet for climate impact. A deeper understanding of the entire supply chain from seed to plate is necessary to truly make climate-smart food choices. It encourages us to ask more questions about how our food is produced.
Okay, that complexity is important to understand. This whole issue is so vast, touching on literally every aspect of our lives. So let's bring it back to the individual. What specific actions can you, the listener, take to be part of the solution? Where does our collective role begin in taking responsibility for this?
You, the listener, absolutely have a critical and powerful role to play in this global effort. It's not just up to governments or corporations. Making informed choices about your food consumption is paramount. This means actively trying to opt for locally sourced and sustainably produced products where that's feasible, understanding the nuances we just discussed about their environmental footprint. It means embracing more plant-rich diets, perhaps starting with 1 or 2 meat-free days a week, or swapping beef for chicken or pulses sometimes. Every decision you make at the grocery store or when ordering food, it directly contributes to or helps alleviate the pressure on our global food systems. Beyond what you buy, actively reducing food waste in your own home is a huge contribution. Small behavioral changes like planning meals before shopping, storing food properly to make it last longer, actually using leftovers creatively, composting scraps if possible, these can add up to a significant impact when millions of people do them. The collective impact of these individual behavioral changes can genuinely drive systemic change from the bottom up, creating market demand for more resilient and sustainable food production. Your plate truly is a powerful lever for change.
That's a clear call to action on an individual level, things we can all start doing today. But beyond our plates and our kitchens, what about the broader systemic changes? These clearly require more than just individual consumer choices. What kind of support and funding is desperately needed right now for climate-resilient agriculture and food security on a larger scale?
This is where the numbers are frankly deeply concerning and show a massive disconnect. We need vastly more public and private investment channeled into climate-resilient agriculture and food security systems. The data tells a pretty grim story. Only about 4% of global climate finance tracked in 2019-20 actually went to agri-food systems. 4%.
It's only 4%. That seems incredibly low given how fundamental food is.
It is incredibly low. Think about that. Despite food being the absolute bedrock of our existence and highly vulnerable to climate change, a mere 4% of global climate finance is actually directed towards making our agri-food systems more resilient or sustainable. It's akin to meticulously weatherproofing your roof while the entire foundation of your house is visibly crumbling beneath you. We are critically underinvesting in the very mechanism that keeps us fed and alive. This funding is absolutely crucial for enabling farmers, especially the smallholders in vulnerable regions we discussed earlier, to adopt vital adaptation practices. Things like switching to drought-resistant crop varieties, implementing improved water management techniques, accessing climate information services, or adopting climate-smart irrigation. And while things like crop insurance and disaster relief funds exist to help farmers after extreme weather events strike, they are becoming prohibitively expensive and increasingly difficult to access or even sustain in some high-risk areas. This is due to the sheer increase in the likelihood and intensity of climate-driven extreme weather events. Insurance models are breaking down. We are simply not putting nearly enough resources towards proactively building resilience in the most foundational aspects of our survival, and that's a significant barrier to progress.
So it's a huge funding gap, making it harder and harder for farmers, especially most vulnerable, to adapt. Beyond funding, how can we as citizens engage more effectively in advocacy and raise awareness to push for these necessary systemic changes? What does that look like?
Well, this isn't just about individual consumer choices or even direct financial support through donations, though those help. It's critically about driving systemic change through collective action and political pressure, engaging in advocacy, raising widespread awareness about this critical climate-food nexus, how they're deeply intertwined, and pushing tirelessly for ambitious policy changes at local, national, and international levels are absolutely essential roles for citizens. Supporting citizen science initiatives, for example. These programs often train local communities to gather scientific data on their own food systems and the climate impacts they are experiencing. This can empower grassroots action and directly inform decision-making by bridging the gap between local traditional knowledge and scientific understanding. Furthermore, comprehensive education campaigns are needed. These need to reach everyone, from primary schools teaching children about sustainable food, right through to broad public outreach campaigns. They can help redefine what's considered acceptable food, for instance, embracing those less than perfect fruits and vegetables to reduce waste and foster more sustainable habits and expectations throughout society. It's fundamentally about building a collective understanding, a shared sense of urgency, and a strong commitment to transformation, ensuring that political will ultimately aligns with scientific necessity and social justice.
Education and grassroots action are clearly vital components. But ultimately, governments and policymakers hold significant power and responsibility here. What priorities must they embrace to seriously tackle climate change mitigation and adaptation within our food systems? What should be top of their agenda?
Governments and policymakers absolutely must prioritize climate change mitigation and adaptation within food systems with extreme urgency and coherence. While many countries have already included food systems in their national climate plans, their NDCs, much more needs to be done. The ambition level must be dramatically escalated and implementation needs to follow. This involves effective multi-level governance, recognizing that solutions need to happen at all scales. From supporting local, community-based adaptation CBA efforts, like those successful projects in Nepal that skillfully combine traditional knowledge with modern innovation to build resilience to changing weather patterns, right up to comprehensive national adaptation plans like Indonesia's, which aim to integrate climate change considerations into broader development strategies and sectoral planning. The policy levers available are varied and potentially powerful. They include financial incentives like targeted taxes on unsustainable practices like excessive fertilizer use or deforestation, and subsidies or grants for adopting climate-resilient ones like agroforestry or water-saving irrigation. Innovative insurance schemes that genuinely protect vulnerable farmers from climate shocks are needed. And, crucially, as we discussed regarding price impacts, robust social safety nets like food assistance programs or cash transfers are essential to protect vulnerable populations from rising food prices and the economic shocks that can accompany climate action or climate impacts. It's about creating an enabling policy environment that actively rewards resilience and sustainability across the entire food sector while ensuring a just transition.
This really is a global challenge, as you've emphasized, demanding truly global solutions. It can't be solved by one country alone. What's the specific role of international cooperation in building a sustainable and equitable future for our food systems?
International cooperation is not merely beneficial, it is absolutely essential. It's indispensable for tackling the cross-border issues that arise. Think about forced migration driven by climate impacts and food insecurity, or even conflicts that can spill across borders, often linked to competition over dwindling resources like water or grazing land. These require coordinated international responses. Cooperation is also vital for ensuring transparent and equitable global food trade. Trade can, in theory, act as a buffer against localized climate shocks. If one region experiences a devastating drought leading to crop failure, well-functioning global trade can help divert supplies from areas with surpluses, preventing famine. However, we must always acknowledge the complexities and potential downsides. While trade can enhance food availability overall, it can also, under certain conditions or unfair trade rules, depress prices for smallholder farmers in importing countries, undermining their livelihoods and potentially even leading to outmigration as local agriculture becomes unsustainable. This highlights the critical need for well-managed, fair, and equitable trade policies that genuinely benefit all parties, particularly the most vulnerable producers and consumers. It demands a nuanced approach to global food governance, one that focuses on building fair, resilient, and sustainable systems, not just maximizing trade volume.
So we need strong governance, effective policies, and robust international cooperation. But what about technological breakthroughs? Are there new innovations in agriculture and food technology on the horizon that could really help us address this crisis? What breakthroughs might help save us, or at least buy us time?
We certainly need relentless innovation across the board in agriculture and food technology, alongside the policy and behavioral changes. This includes enhancing early warning systems, making them more accurate, timely, and accessible so they can predict droughts, floods, pest outbreaks, and other stresses with greater lead time, allowing farmers and governments to prepare effectively. Using sophisticated tools like geographic information systems, GIS, and remote sensing satellites for real-time monitoring of agricultural conditions, water availability, and vegetation health helps identify vulnerabilities and optimize resource use much more precisely. And leveraging the power of widely accessible smartphone applications is huge. These can disseminate crucial data on weather forecasts, optimal planting times, market prices, and food availability directly to farmers and consumers, empowering them with actionable real-time information. On the biological front, the genomic tools we mentioned, like phenomics, that high-throughput measurement of plant traits, and CRISPR-Cas9 gene editing, are really on the cutting edge for breeding climate-resilient crops and animals. They are accelerating the development of varieties that can hopefully withstand harsher conditions, new diseases, and emerging pest threats.
And beyond crops and livestock.
Yes. Furthermore, there's a lot of research into new technologies for protein production. Things like microbial protein, perhaps grown using waste streams or even hydrogen, or cultured meat grown directly from animal cells in labs, are being explored as potential alternatives to traditional animal agriculture. These could significantly reduce the land, water, and greenhouse gas footprints associated with meat production. Now, their economic viability, scalability, consumer acceptance, and overall systemic impacts are still being rigorously studied and debated, but they offer fascinating, potentially disruptive long-term possibilities. And even in the digital realm, technologies like blockchain are emerging as potentially powerful tools. They could enhance transparency and traceability throughout complex global food supply chains, fostering trust, reducing fraud and waste, and improving efficiency by creating an immutable record of food's journey from farm to fork. These innovations, when combined effectively with policy and behavior change, offer multiple pathways towards a more secure and sustainable food future.
That's a lot of incredible innovation happening. But let's also remember the devastating human cost we touched on earlier. It's easy to get lost in the technology or policy. What's the connection between climate change, the resulting food insecurity, and the profound human tragedies of conflict and migration that we're seeing escalate?
What's truly devastating here, and something we must never lose sight of, is the profound human cost. Climate variability and extremes are acting as powerful stress multipliers that contribute directly to mass human displacement and can tragically act as breeding grounds for instability and conflict. Persistent droughts, like those seen in Syria from 2007-2010, which triggered a mass exodus from collapsing rural areas into already strained cities, clearly exacerbated resource competition and agricultural collapse. Many analysts agree this directly fueled the civil unrest and riots that preceded the wider conflict. We've seen entire regions destabilized by these cascading climate-induced pressures. In Somalia, repeated and intensifying droughts have pushed again, leading to massive internal displacement and exacerbating the existing long-term conflict. And look at small island developing states. They face multiple compounding climate stressors, simultaneously rising sea levels, inundating coastal land, more intense storms destroying infrastructure and agriculture, and groundwater depletion due to saltwater intrusion into freshwater lenses. They are experiencing increased forced migration, both internally and internationally, as their very land and livelihoods become untenable. Understanding and urgently addressing these complex, deeply interconnected relationships between climate change, food security, water scarcity, migration, and conflict is not just crucial for achieving food security. It is absolutely fundamental for global stability, peace, and basic human dignity. It is a profound humanitarian crisis unfolding before our eyes, and climate change is pouring fuel on the fire.
So what does this all mean for our future? Where do we find hope? The good news, and there is good news amidst this, is that there are fundamental powerful synergies possible between achieving zero hunger, which is Sustainable Development Goal 2, and taking climate action, SDG 13. While current development paradigms sometimes show trade-offs between these goals, for instance, poorly designed climate policies, hurting food access, sustainable agriculture practices have this incredible potential to convert these potential conflicts into positive linkages. They can provide both critical climate adaptation benefits and significant climate mitigation benefits simultaneously. Think building soil carbon while also improving drought resilience. This integrated approach, one that recognizes the deep interconnectedness of food security, livelihoods, biodiversity, and climate action, is absolutely essential for building a truly sustainable, equitable, and just future for all of us. It means we don't necessarily have to choose between feeding people today and saving the planet for tomorrow. We can and absolutely must do both, together.
We've covered a lot today. The alarming trends, the critical vulnerabilities across our food systems, and the profound urgency of the action needed. The path forward, it really demands an unprecedented level of collective effort, relentless innovation on all fronts, and perhaps most importantly, a fundamental shift in how we produce, consume, and ultimately value food globally.
Yeah, a fundamental shift. So considering the scale of this challenge and the solutions that are actually at hand, are we truly prepared to transform our global food system? Not just tweak it, but transform it, not just to survive, but hopefully to thrive in a changing climate. And maybe more personally, what steps will you, our listener, take to demand and support this critical transformation? Join us in staying vigilant and informed on these critical global issues. Please like, share, and subscribe to the Global War Watch Network for more analyses like this one. We really value your insights. Please share your thoughts, your questions, your own experiences in the comment section below. You can also connect with us on social media. All the links are provided in the description. Thank you for tuning in.